My talk is called Designing the Invisible, and I'll be honest, when I submitted the title and the description, I hadn't actually written it yet. I had these like half-formed thoughts about what I wanted to say. And I kind of wanted to use this as a forcing function to make sure that I had those thoughts calcified into something real and presentable. And then as the deadline got closer and closer, I realized that what I thought I wanted to say and what I actually wanted to say were very different things. So I'm assuming very few of you actually read the talk description, but if it's very different from that, that's why. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it even means to be a product designer. We're kind of making this up as we go, right? I think there are, what, maybe 60 people here, 70 people here. If I asked every single person in the room, what do you do? Everyone's going to give a totally different answer. And I think that's fascinating because it's a rare industry that's like that. Like, you're not going to find a self-taught heart surgeon, I hope. And you're not going to find a self-taught civil engineer, I hope. And there's no like product designer union. There's no like medieval guild of product designers with Steve Jobs on the crest. And so this is one of the few jobs where you can be self-taught and come from a myriad of other fields. And so I'll open by saying I am a self-taught designer. We've already covered, I work for a company called Spoke. We'll get back to that later. Sorry, it's a little hard to see what the next slides are. I think it's fascinating that we all in this room get to be inventing our jobs from scratch. I think it's a really rare privilege because all of us here are part of this conversation where we're defining what exactly it is that we do. And part of the reason I know that we're defining this from scratch is that this meetup would have looked different years ago, right? 5 years ago, this would have been the Brooklyn Product Design Meetup, probably would have been the Brooklyn UX UI Meetup. 5 years before that, maybe the Brooklyn Web Design Meetup. And 5 years before that, the Brooklyn Webmaster Meetup or something like that. We keep changing our titles. And I've become enamored with the idea that it's not necessarily that we're just chasing the next hip title because we want to get hired. It might just be that our jobs are changing as the industry changes, as the needs of our employers change. And so when I say that I'm a self-taught product designer, I don't mean that no one else taught me, that I learned from scratch. What I really mean is that the people who were teaching me were dislocated from me in space and in time. I was learning from books and from blogs and from Twitter and from failing again and again until somehow eventually it started to click and I felt like I could do what I was given. I guess you could just say I'm Miss Design 101. Did anyone here have a traditional design education? Go to school for design? For all the flexibility that being self-taught has afforded, I kind of envy the idea of having a traditional curriculum and having someone to point you towards the things that maybe you wouldn't study if it was just you. I'll be honest, there are some things that I should have learned on day one of being a designer, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to discover that it was important. Things like color theory. I could cobble my way through making an interface that looked attractive, but for years I didn't know that there were like scientific underpinnings of colors. And so there have been some lessons that I've been learning the long way around. And one of those lessons is summed up by a quote that I'll bet we all know. It's a paraphrase of Steve Jobs. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. Everyone know the quote? Has everyone heard this before? It's like if we ever do have a product designer medieval guild, like this is the thing that goes on the crest, right? But when I was a young designer, younger than I am now, about 10 years ago, I was first getting into this. I didn't know that design was a discipline. I was a bored poli-sci student in college. I was being sort of disenchanted with the fact that poli-sci classes were not at all like the West Wing, like I thought they might be, and I needed this creative outlet. And so I started building websites for what I thought was the astronomical sum of $400 for a simple 10 or 20 page WordPress website with a custom theme written in PHP. College Jordan was not very bright sometimes. And I liked this quote because it sounded so profound and it added this gravitas to what I was doing that I felt like, I don't know if anyone else was like this, maybe this was just me, I just desperately wanted to be taken seriously when I was younger, especially as I was discovering that design was a thing. And so I loved that I could just like whip this quote out whenever anyone doubted that what I was doing was more than like a quirky thing you do between history classes. And be like, what, you think all I do is make stuff look pretty? Well no, design isn't just what it looks and feels like, design is how it works. There are times when I wish I had a time machine I could punch College Jordan in the face. He was sort of insufferable. In case you're wondering, this is an aside, but I left the poli-sci major. I got a BS in entrepreneurship, and the irony is definitely not lost on me. It was the major that had the most interest to me, but also the least work, so I could keep building websites. And so somehow I became a web design freelancer. And I want to clarify this time, I'm going to keep coming back to that quote. No matter how much lip service I pay to the idea that design is how it works, I hadn't internalized the lessons there yet. What I really thought, or what I'm really doing, was design as a superficial thing. If I did do anything about how it works, it was like I'd create like a cool hover state for a button or something. And I sort of doubt that's what Steve Jobs meant with that quote. He didn't mean a cool hover state, he meant stuff that's way deeper than that. I did the freelance thing for a while. Anyone here been a freelancer? If you were cut out for that life, more power to you. I was not. I did not have the discipline to do that. I just really wanted traditional employment, something that my entrepreneurship major really did not prepare me for. So, did a web design freelance thing for a while, then eventually I got a job as a UX designer. And I wound up actually being the UX guy at a very small studio. They didn't have a UX practice at all. And it was this mind-expanding thing, because suddenly I was responsible for a very different set of problems than I had been previously. I had been thinking about pixels, suddenly I had to be thinking about flows. And so that quote began to resonate in a very different way than it had previously. Suddenly I couldn't keep thinking about design in this purely aesthetic sense. I had to be thinking about how do people use the things that we're building. Did UX design for a few years. It was enterprise UX, so it was for like Fortune 500s on internal tools, kind of brutal. And one of the big lessons there was something that I, again, would have known had I ever taken a Design 101 class. If you make something that looks really good but doesn't work well, people will be miserable using it. And if you make something that looks like Craigslist, but it does the job really well, people might still love your products. Something I should have learned years before I actually did. But then I realized agency life wasn't for me, and enterprise life wasn't for me, so I wound up at a company called Agrilist, based out of Brooklyn. It was an ag tech platform, is an ag tech platform, it's still around, I'm just not there anymore. And I became a product designer. And I didn't know what a product designer was. Has anyone here been in that position? You got the title, but you didn't know what the job was? Is anyone there right now? My boss is here, I can't raise my hands. I sort of thought that product design was just the new cool thing that we're calling UX design, and instead what I discovered was that it was something different again. It was like UX design in that it was not entirely about pixels, it was about flows, but it was also about more than that. It was about the strategy behind what we were building. Not just can we build something that works really well, but can we build something that people actually want? Are we building the right thing? It was like suddenly being able to see in 4 dimensions, or playing 3-dimensional chess, or some other mixed metaphor that I'm probably laboring too much now. It was just something totally different. And all of a sudden I was responsible for things like the marketing website, figuring out how do we package these things as well. And it was like suddenly making use of the business portion of my education in a way that I hadn't previously. And so I kept coming back to this quote, design is not just what it looks like, it feels like. Design is how it works. I thought this quote was so profound when I first heard it, and then I heard it over and over and over again. It began to sound very hackneyed, just through sheer repetition. And then I came out the other side and started to sound profound again. As I realized in my career that I've been doing less pixel work and more work with flows. Less work on colors and layouts and more with incentives and disincentives. Less work on interactions and more on building frameworks in which people have these interactions. And I've been realizing that not only is design about how it works, but how it works is often completely invisible. There are a lot of times when the things that we're building are not just the sum total of the pixels on a screen, it's the sum total of the way that those pixels interface with the outside world, or the user's experience, or third-party platforms or integrations, or even now I work on a product that has conversational interfaces, where the medium I'm designing for is largely just text being traded back and forth between 2 parties. That's such a different type of challenge. I'm learning that my discipline is less about the screens themselves and more about the gap between those screens, the glue that ties those things together. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Spoke. Colors are not great on there. We actually have a nice pink logo, but that looks purple. Yeah, and that amused me. No one's laughing, so that's just me. This is not going to be an ad for Spoke. I just think that it's probably helpful to get some context on what we're doing. However, if you work for a company that has between 150 and 1,000 employees and uses Slack pretty heavily and a G Suite, please tap me on the shoulder after this, I can hook you up. Spoke, we say, it powers the on-demand workplace. And when I think about the phrase on-demand, what I think of is consumer technology largely. It used to be if you want to get someplace, you'd run out to the street, hail a cab, now you hit a button on your phone. It used to be if you wanted to make a meal at home, you'd run to the grocery store, now you just get the stuff delivered to your room. That's on-demand. But the B2B world tends to lag a little bit behind B2C. Consumer stuff, like we're all consumers as well as employees. And we get accustomed to certain ways of doing things as like people, but then you break your laptop and you have to like hunt down the IT person's email address and send them an email and then have like 4 back and forths as they ask you all the questions. We're trying to solve that problem. We're trying to use AI to do it. Which some of you are thinking right now, okay, you're powered by buzzwords. I promise you we're not seeing it do some magical things. I was going to give you a demo. I'm not sure this screen is super conducive to demos, so I'll try. Imagine if you have a question like, I bring my dog to work, or something like this, or I broke my laptop. Instead of having to ping someone, you just type it in, and it knows automatically it's going to be for the IT department. It's a broken hardware request, and it knows what other questions to ask you. So instead of like 4 back and forths via email, you type it in once and then your problem is solved. Or if, let's say, you have a knowledge request, you can just jump into Slack, because we have a pretty robust Slack integration. We meet people where they live. You can type in, what can I type in? What are our brand colors? And it'll just spit back your brand colors for you. So no more being a designer who's answering those questions all the time. Or where are our logos kept, or things like that. What's our design process? It makes it instantaneous and personalized for the user, and it also reduces the workload on the people who, if you're an HR or an IT person, you probably didn't sign up to answer repetitive questions, you signed up to solve interesting problems. This is the sort of thing that gets me excited now, because this is the sort of design where I do like basically no visual design now. We already had a robust design system when I came on board, so my design life is basically now just stringing together things that other people built into new configurations that solve problems. Or working with integrations, figuring out how can we make something that feels authentically like a Slack experience, but also feels like this thing that we're building too. And now I'm realizing that product design is kind of different in every context, and it's different for every person, and we don't have these definitions yet. If you say, I'm a senior product designer, I don't know what senior product designer means at different companies. It's different in every place. And so we have this incredible, rare opportunity to make it up as we're going along. Is anyone here a student? Is anyone here not a working product designer but would like to be? A few people. I hope you are so excited by this, because this is the most exciting time to be joining this field. It's mature enough that we have some practices in place. You have people that you can talk to about these things, but it's still at the phase where you can contribute. You can help define what this is that we're building together. And so I set out to provide answers with this talk, and I wound up just having more questions. This was sort of meandering, and I think that's the way it is. I would encourage all of you to think, how would you give this talk if it was you? I can talk about my experience better than anyone else can, and you can talk about your experience better than anyone else can. I would encourage you to just share your path to this career with just 3 other people throughout this week. Tell them how you got into product design, tell you why it excites you. As a product designer, I'm not allowed to end things without having a call to action, so call to action. I'd love it if you just asked yourself, what does product design mean to you? It's a tough question, I don't have an answer yet. But then I also want you to ask yourself, how do you articulate that in your work? Because I think how you answer that question will inform how you approach your day-to-day work. I'd love it if you ping me on Twitter or wherever you happen to be with your answer. If you think about this week or 10 weeks from now or 3 months from now, I would just love to hear what you're thinking about. So with that not ending, thank you very much.